Elias Ward had never seen a world like Valeth before. From the shuttle's viewport, he could see towering crystal spires rising into the violet sky, reflecting sunlight in every shade of color imaginable. The air shimmered faintly, giving the landscape an almost dreamlike quality. For humanity, this was more than a diplomatic mission. It was a chance to make first contact with the Karani, a civilization that had remained isolated from the galactic community for centuries. Elias adjusted his suit nervously. He had been trained for these situations, briefed on protocol, and rehearsed every possible greeting. Yet he could not shake a feeling of unease. The Karani were known for their precision, their emotional restraint, and their strict customs. They had a unique biology and social structure that made even simple gestures highly significant. One wrong move could ruin decades of preparation, or worse, spark conflict. As he stepped off the shuttle, Elias was struck by the Karani's appearance. They were taller than humans, with slender frames and pale, shimmering skin that seemed almost translucent. Their eyes were larger, dark and reflective, giving them a look of quiet intelligence. Most striking of all were the faint bioluminescent patterns on their forearms and chests, glowing softly in rhythm with their emotions, a language Elias could not read. The Karani delegation waited in a semicircle, silent and still. At the center stood Sareth, the ambassador assigned to greet the humans. Her presence was commanding without arrogance, calm without coldness. Elias noticed that her glowing patterns were subtle, steady, almost imperceptible. It was said that the Karani controlled these indicators carefully. Only extreme feelings would make them flare. "Greetings, Ambassador Sareth," Elias said, bowing slightly in the human way. He knew bowing was a neutral gesture, unlikely to offend anyone, and hoped it would convey respect. Sareth inclined her head once, the closest approximation to a greeting Elias could read from her expression. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Elias could feel the tension pressing against him like a physical weight. Every movement he made seemed to be observed under a microscope. He was not used to being treated like a subject. But he reminded himself, this was diplomacy, and patience was key. Then, as the formal introductions continued, a minor accident occurred. Elias reached out instinctively to steady Sareth as she stepped back on a slick section of the crystalline floor. His hand brushed lightly against her arm, no more than a touch of reassurance. In human culture, it was a polite, protective gesture. The reaction was instantaneous. Sareth stiffened. Her bioluminescent patterns flared brightly, more than Elias had ever imagined possible. Light raced across her arms and chest in intricate swirls of blue and gold. The Karani Council gasped. Some stepped back in shock. Guards reached for their weapons, unsure if a breach of law had occurred. Elias froze. He had no idea what he had done. I meant no harm," he stammered. His voice sounded small in the vast hall. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe." Sareth looked at him, her dark eyes wide with a mix of fear, confusion, and something else he could not name. Her indicator pulsed rapidly, as if trying to communicate a message in a language he could not comprehend. The entire assembly was silent, waiting, unsure of how to respond. "Remove him," one of the council members whispered sharply. The tone carried authority. "He has triggered the bond. This is forbidden." Elias tilted his head, confused. "Bond? What bond?" he asked, his words carefully neutral. Sareth took a slow step back, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of caution. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but firm. "Human, you have touched me. The bond, the mate indicator has reacted. This has not happened for centuries." The term mate indicator echoed in Elias's mind. He had heard the concept during training, an ancient Karani biological signal that would only activate once in a lifetime when a being sensed complete safety and trust. It was considered sacred, private, and irreversible. That a human, entirely unaware, had activated it was beyond comprehension. Elias raised his hands in a universal gesture of peace. I didn't know," I didn't mean to, the council murmured among themselves, debating what to do. Some argued for immediate quarantine of the humans, while others insisted on observing before taking action. Sareth, meanwhile, seemed frozen in thought. Her indicator continued to glow brightly, a silent testimony to the unexpected event. In the middle of confusion, a young Qurani scholar stepped forward. Ambassador Sareth, she said respectfully, perhaps this is not a violation, but a signal. Humans, they are different. Their gestures, their touch, their emotions. They are not like ours. Elias's brow furrowed. Different? How? The scholar glanced at him, then back at Sareth. Humans bond not through control or ritual. They bond through choice, through empathy, through understanding. What you have done, your touch has given her a sense of safety she has not felt in centuries. The room fell silent again. Even the guards lowered their hands. Elias realized that what he had thought was a minor mistake might actually be something profound. He had no intention of causing disruption. Yet the very essence of humanity, empathy, trust, courage, had triggered a biological response. The Qurani considered sacred, Sareth finally spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. This is unprecedented. He has activated the mate indicator without force, without ceremony. It is impossible. Elias swallowed. I'm just human. I didn't know this could happen. Her eyes softened, though the glow of her indicator remained bright. Your species. It is unlike any we have known. You survive because you trust, because you take risks, because you care. And in doing so, you awaken what we have long forgotten. The words settled over him like a heavy cloak. Elias did not understand the full meaning yet, but he sensed the truth. Humanity had a power the galaxy had underestimated. Not strength of arms or advanced technology, but strength of spirit. The council's debate grew louder. Some members argued that the humans must leave immediately. Others suggested careful study. Sareth, however, remained steadfast. Though uncertain, she looked at Elias, and for the first time, allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to form. It was a smile of curiosity, of hope, and perhaps, of something more. Elias realized then that their first contact had changed something fundamental. What had begun as a routine diplomatic mission had transformed into a test, one of courage, patience, and understanding. One simple human gesture had not only startled an alien civilization but had also forced them to reconsider everything they believed about trust, emotion, and survival. As the day ended, Elias was escorted to the guest quarters, unsure of what the future held. He knew that what he had done could be seen as a mistake or as a miracle. One thing was certain: nothing on Velith would ever be the same again. That night, as he gazed out over the crystalline spires under the twin moons, he thought about the power of a touch. To humans, it was simple, a gesture of reassurance, a mark of connection. But to the Qurani, it was history-changing, an event that could shift the balance of their society. Elias wondered if they could understand that humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to care, even when it was risky, even when it was dangerous. And somewhere deep within the Qurani Council, whispers began to circulate. Perhaps humans were not just another species to be studied. Perhaps they were something more extraordinary. The first part of the story ends here, with the humans still strangers on Velith, and the Qurani unsure of how to respond. A single, unintended gesture had set in motion events that would challenge centuries of tradition, test the limits of understanding, and reveal the hidden power of empathy. Humanity's presence had already begun to change the course of history. The day after the incident, the crystalline halls of Velith were filled with whispers. Word of Elias Ward's touch and the activation of Sareth's mate indicator had spread like wildfire among the Qurani Council. Scholars, politicians, and soldiers debated in hushed tones whether this human gesture was a breach of protocol or a miracle. Sareth had been removed from public view immediately. The council had called in the best scientists and biospecialists to examine her. Carefully observing her bioluminescent patterns, they had expected fear, panic, or confusion. But what they saw was unprecedented. Her glowing indicator remained active, but instead of signaling distress or submission, it pulsed gently, almost harmoniously. Elias, meanwhile, was confined to a guest suite that overlooked the crystalline city. He had been informed of the unusual attention he was receiving, though he had no idea what it truly meant. Human understanding of alien biology was limited, but he could sense the tension. Every guard outside the door, every shadow moving in the corridor, spoke of curiosity mixed with caution. He paced the room, thinking back to the brief contact with Sareth. From a human perspective, it was nothing more than a polite, protective gesture, but the reaction it had caused, that was something entirely different. Humans had always relied on trust and empathy to survive. It had been in their nature to reach out to others, to communicate with gestures, to care even when it was risky. Elias had never thought this simple act could have such consequences. Down in the council chambers, arguments were growing heated. One faction insisted the humans must leave immediately. "They are dangerous," said one elder Karani, his voice sharp. "They disrupt our sacred laws. Their touch has activated the mate indicator, a sign that cannot be undone. If we allow them to remain, we invite chaos." Another faction disagreed. "We cannot ignore this," said a younger council member. "We must understand them. Humans are unlike any species we have encountered. They survive not because they are the strongest or the fastest, but because they choose trust. Perhaps there is something we can learn from them." Sareth, observing quietly from a separate chamber, remained silent. Her indicator glowed faintly, a reminder of the unprecedented event. She felt a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and something she did not fully understand, an echo of a feeling her people rarely experienced. Genuine connection. Later that day, a senior scientist, Dr. Vielle, entered Sareth's private observation room. He was a meticulous Hirani, known for his calm logic and strict adherence to protocol. "Ambassador Sareth," he said, bowing slightly, "we must understand what has happened. Your mate indicator reacted, but not as expected. Normally, activation leads to biological dominance, submission, or pairing behavior. Your response is different, gentle, harmonious, unexplained." Sareth looked at him thoughtfully. "I do not understand it myself," she admitted. "The touch. It caused a reaction. Yes. But it did not command me. It did not force me to obey or submit. It was a sense of safety, of trust." Dr. Vale frowned. "Trust? That is unusual. Our species rarely experiences trust in such an immediate, physical way. It is dangerous. Our history has taught us that safety is earned only through ceremony and ritual, never through spontaneous gestures." "Perhaps humans are different," Sareth suggested quietly. "They survive because they can trust without guarantee. They can act without fear. It is remarkable." Dr. Vale's eyes narrowed. "Remarkable, yes, but dangerous. If this effect spreads, our social order could be challenged. If other Kirani sense this, activation without ceremony, without ritual, without authority, it may disrupt centuries of tradition." Meanwhile, Elias remained unaware of the depth of the situation. When he requested to meet Sareth, initially as a courtesy, the council debated for hours. Finally, it was agreed. A monitored meeting would occur, with strict observation and no physical contact allowed. When Elias entered the observation chamber, he noticed immediately how different Sareth appeared. She stood taller than he remembered, her glowing patterns muted but still present, like a soft heartbeat of light. Her expression was calm, yet curious. Elias offered a respectful bow. "Ambassador Sareth," he said softly, "I hope you are well." "I am sorry if I caused confusion yesterday. I did not understand your customs. Sareth inclined her head. It is not confusion that I feel, she replied. It is curiosity. I have never felt anything like what happened. Your gesture. It was simple, yet it reached me in ways I cannot explain. Our biology should not allow this. Yet it did. Elias smiled faintly. Humans. We survive because we connect. We trust, even when it is risky. We reach out because we know it helps us endure. That is how we thrive. Sareth considered his words. Trust. And connection. That is foreign to Qurani life. We rely on control, on ceremony, on strict patterns. To feel something genuine, instantaneous. It is unsettling. Elias nodded. I cannot teach your people to feel as we do in one day. But perhaps, in time, you will see that choice and empathy are strengths, not weaknesses. The Qurani scientists and council members observing silently took notes. They had seen what they had expected, the activation of a mate indicator. But what they did not expect was the absence of coercion, the presence of understanding, and the calm between the human and Sareth. Later, a young Qurani researcher whispered to her colleague, Do you see? The human does not demand. The human does not force. Yet she, Sareth, feels compelled, in a way that does not threaten her. How is this possible? Her colleague shook his head. I do not know. Perhaps humans are a species we underestimated. Perhaps they are extraordinary. Over the next days, more observations were conducted. Sareth and Elias engaged in conversation, though always under careful watch. Physical contact was forbidden, yet their interactions were filled with an unspoken understanding. Elias spoke of humanity's history, of survival in harsh worlds, of the importance of cooperation and trust. Sareth listened, sometimes quietly, sometimes asking questions. She began to realize something astonishing. The human way of living, relying on empathy and choice, was not weak. It was not reckless. It was powerful. The Qurani, despite their technological mastery and long lifespans, had never evolved this ability. They had learned control, ritual, and caution, but never true connection. Elias, and by extension humanity, had shown her a different path. In private moments, Sareth reflected on the changes occurring within her. Her indicator pulsed softly, not with the urgency of mating or submission, but with something more subtle. Recognition. She recognized a species that valued life and trust. A species that could survive through care, courage, and choice. The council, meanwhile, struggled with the implications. Political factions began to form. Some argued that humans were dangerous, capable of undermining centuries of Qurani culture. Others suggested that humanity represented an opportunity, a chance to expand understanding and strengthen the galaxy's future through shared knowledge. Even among the guards and soldiers, conversations were whispered. Humans are strange, one said. They touch without expectation. They speak without demand. And yet, they survive. Perhaps they are the strongest beings we have met. Sareth found herself torn. She had been raised to follow rules, to maintain control, to honor traditions. Yet the experience with Elias opened her mind to new possibilities. Could a society survive without rigid control? Could connection, trust, and empathy be a foundation for strength? She did not have all the answers, but she felt a spark of hope, a spark she had not felt in decades. As Part 2 draws to a close, the situation on Valeth remained tense, but full of promise. Elias had not intended to alter the course of Qurani society with a simple gesture, yet he had. Sareth's mate indicator had activated, but in a way no one could have predicted. Human empathy had touched her deeply, revealing a path her species had long forgotten. The galaxy watched closely, and the Qurani began to understand a new truth. Strength was not only measured in power or ritual, but in the ability to trust, to connect, and to act with courage and care. Humanity's influence had begun not through force, not through conquest, but through the simplest, most human of actions, empathy. And somewhere in the quiet halls of Velith, Sareth made a silent vow. To understand this new way of thinking, to explore the possibilities humans offered, and to see how her people could evolve without losing their essence. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt full of potential. News of Elias Ward and the unexpected activation of Sareth's mate indicator had spread far beyond the crystalline halls of Velith. Through the interstellar communication networks of the Galactic Compact, stories of the human envoy who had awakened something ancient in the Kirani began to circulate. Some species viewed humans with admiration, others with fear. They were a species no one fully understood, a species whose strength came not from weapons, technology, or ceremony, but from something far harder to measure: courage, empathy, and trust. Back on Velith, tension was building in the council chambers. Elders argued fiercely about what action should be taken. One side demanded the immediate removal of the humans, claiming that their presence could disrupt not just Sareth's life, but the stability of Kirani society itself. The other side argued for patience, urging the council to study and learn from the humans. The debate was no longer simply about a ceremonial breach. It was about the very nature of the Kirani civilization. Sareth remained at the center of the discussion, her indicator glowing softly, a constant reminder of the power humanity had inadvertently unleashed. She felt a sense of unease. Her people had always prided themselves on control, on predictability, on following traditions. Yet here was Elias, a human, demonstrating that strength could also come from connection, from understanding, and from choice. She realized that her thoughts and feelings were changing in ways she had never experienced before. Elias, confined to the guest quarters under watchful eyes, sensed the mounting tension. Every interaction with Sareth had been carefully monitored, and every word he spoke was noted and recorded. Yet he was determined to continue his mission, even in the face of uncertainty. He knew that humans had survived in harsh conditions not because they were stronger or faster than other species, but because they could adapt, learn, and empathize. He hoped that these qualities could influence the Kirani for the better. The next council meeting was tense. Representatives from different sectors of Kirani society gathered, their glowing indicators reflecting their emotions: frustration, curiosity, fear, and cautious hope. The leader of the council, an elder named Velithar, spoke first. "This human," he said, glancing at Elias through the observation window, "has activated something within Ambassador Sareth. Our laws call this a violation. Yet the results are not what we expected. The indicator does not demand submission. It does not force pairing. Instead, it signals trust, safety, and recognition." "How do we interpret this?" A young council member, Mirael, stood. "Perhaps this is a lesson we have long ignored. Humans thrive, not through coercion, but through choice. They bond because they want to, not because they are compelled. If a single touch can awaken the indicator in this way, it may show us that our species has been missing something vital: empathy, trust, and courage." Another elder, however, shook his head. "Dangerous. This is dangerous. Our traditions exist to preserve order. If humans can activate such responses without ceremony or authority, what will prevent chaos? What will stop others from following their example and undermining our society?" Sareth finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I have felt what humans feel. It is not dangerous. It is liberating. Their way of bonding, of connecting, does not weaken us. It strengthens us. Trust, choice, empathy, these are powerful tools. We have relied on control for too long. Perhaps it is time to reconsider what it truly means to be strong." The council fell silent. No one had expected such a declaration from an ambassador, nor had they anticipated the clarity in her words. Elias, watching from the observation room, realized that the Kirani were beginning to see humanity in a new light. Meanwhile, messages from other species in the Galactic Compact arrived. Some were cautious, warning that humans might destabilize entire civilizations. Others were intrigued, curious to understand how a species could wield influence without weapons or authority. Reports highlighted the strange, almost miraculous effect of Elias's gesture. A human had touched a Kirani, and the response was not coercion, not fear, but recognition. It was an entirely new phenomenon. As the days passed, the council began to allow more interaction between Elias and Sareth, though under careful observation. They spoke at length about humanity's history, about the ways humans had survived countless worlds, wars, and disasters. Elias spoke of cooperation, of helping one another even when it was dangerous, and of the courage it took to act with empathy in a harsh universe. Sareth listened intently. She began to see that the human way of life was a strength, not a weakness. Humans did not rely on rigid systems or strict rituals to survive. They relied on each other. They trusted when others doubted. They acted even when there was no guarantee of success. In doing so, they had not only endured, they had thrived. One evening, as the twin moons of Valeth rose over the crystalline city, Sareth approached Elias in the observation chamber. Her indicator glowed faintly, not with urgency, but with curiosity and recognition. "I have thought about what you said," she began. "Your species survives because of what you give freely. Trust, care, courage. We have relied on control. Perhaps we have been blind." Elias smiled softly. "We survive because we choose to connect, even when it is risky. Humans understand that strength comes from unity, not dominance. You have the same potential. Ambassador, you can choose to bond, to trust, and to inspire. That is more powerful than any weapon." Sareth considered his words. A thought began to take shape in her mind. If Kirani society could embrace these ideas, if her people could learn from humanity, they might become stronger than ever before, stronger not through fear, but through understanding. The next council meeting was unlike any before. Discussions shifted from fear to curiosity. Could the Kirani integrate human ways of bonding and trust into their society without losing their identity? Could they learn to value empathy as much as strength and tradition? Some remained skeptical, but the majority agreed to a cautious experiment. Allow limited interactions between humans and Kirani under supervision, to study the effects of trust, choice, and empathy on their species. Word of these developments reached other species across the compact. Some were amazed that humans could influence an entire civilization without force. Others were concerned about the implications, but all began to see a new pattern. Humans were not like other species. They were not controlled by rigid customs or fear. They acted with purpose, empathy, and courage, and that made them unpredictable, inspiring, and perhaps extraordinary. Sareth, now more aware of her own feelings and thoughts, began to speak openly about what she was learning from Elias. She described how humans did not wait for permission to care, did not rely on authority to act, and were willing to risk themselves for the sake of others. In her chambers, her indicator pulsed softly, reflecting a sense of recognition and understanding she had never experienced before. Elias, though confined to the observation area, continued to teach, explain, and share. He understood that his role was not to dominate, not to persuade, but to exemplify the human way. By acting with empathy, patience, and courage, each day he demonstrated that humans could survive and thrive through connection alone. A lesson no technology, no weapon, and no ritual could teach. By the end of the week, the council reached a tentative conclusion. They would allow controlled human presence, not because humans demanded it, but because the Kirani now recognized the value of what they represented. A new path had opened, a path where trust, empathy, and choice were acknowledged as strengths, not weaknesses. As Part 3 closes, The stage is set for a larger revelation. The galaxy has begun to notice humanity not as conquerors, not as warriors, but as a species whose presence could inspire change in the most ancient and guarded societies. Humanity's touch, literally and figuratively, has awakened something within the Kerani that could redefine their future. For Elias, it was a small gesture at first. But that gesture had sparked understanding, challenged tradition, and begun a transformation. Sareth, once bound by the expectations of her species, now felt the stirring of hope and curiosity, and across the galaxy, others began to whisper the same thought. Perhaps humans were extraordinary not because of their weapons, their ships, or their technology, but because they reminded others what it meant to care, to trust, and to act with courage in a universe that often forgot the value of choice. The next part of the story promised even greater challenges. With political factions on Valeth divided and other species watching closely, the true test would come. Could the Kerani embrace this new way of life fully? Could they accept that strength could be measured in empathy, not domination? And could humans continue to inspire change without imposing their will, relying only on the qualities that made them uniquely human? The answer would shape the future of not only Valeth but the entire galaxy, and the journey was only beginning. The days following the Council's decision on Valeth were tense, yet full of anticipation. Kerani society was divided, unsure how to handle the influence of humanity. One faction wanted to isolate the humans entirely, fearing the unknown consequences. Another saw the opportunity for growth, curiosity, and evolution. In the center of this storm was Sareth, whose mate indicator still pulsed gently, reminding everyone that a single human gesture had sparked change. Elias Ward, confined yet undeterred, continued to interact with Sareth and other Kerani under strict observation. Their conversations had grown longer, deeper, and more meaningful. They spoke about survival, choices, morality, and the way humans had endured countless worlds and civilizations through courage and empathy. To the humans, these ideas were natural. To the Kerani, they were revolutionary. One evening, as the twin moons of Valeth rose over the crystalline city, Sareth requested a private conversation with Elias. The council reluctantly allowed it, permitting only distant monitoring. The room was quiet, bathed in soft moonlight that reflected off the crystalline walls. "I have been thinking," Sareth began, her glowing indicator faint but steady. "Your people, they survive because they trust, because they choose to act with empathy. We Kerani rely on ritual and control. Yet, I feel that this is stronger, more resilient." Elias nodded. "It is not easier, but it works. Humans have learned that strength is not only in force or technology, but in courage, empathy, and understanding. We survive because we connect, because we care, and because we act even when there is risk. That is what allows us to endure anything." Sareth looked down, processing his words. "I understand it intellectually. But my people, they will resist. Many will fear this. Some will even call it dangerous. Change is always difficult," Elias replied. "But the greatest discoveries often come from new ways of thinking. You have the power to guide your people toward that understanding, without coercion. You can lead by example." The next morning, Sareth returned to the council chamber with a new resolve. Her indicator glowed more steadily now, reflecting a calm determination. She addressed the council with clarity and courage. "Esteemed council," she began, "humans have shown me something extraordinary. They survive not because they dominate, but because they choose trust, empathy, and courage. Their way of life is not ours, but it is strong, and I believe we can learn from it without losing who we are." There were murmurs of agreement and dissent alike. Some elders shook their heads, wary of embracing an alien approach. Others leaned forward, intrigued by the possibilities. Sareth continued, her voice unwavering. "We have focused for centuries on control, on ritual, on precision. But the humans have reminded us that strength comes from connection. Their presence is not a threat. It is an opportunity. We can open our hearts and minds, even if only a little, and grow stronger together. Elias, observing from a distance, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not forced anyone to accept human ways. He had not demanded respect or compliance. He had only shared ideas and acted with empathy. And now, slowly, a species that had been cautious for centuries was beginning to understand. Weeks passed, and the first experiments began. Human and Karani scientists, philosophers, and diplomats interacted in controlled environments. Small acts of trust were exchanged. Hands offered in reassurance. Collaborative projects undertaken without rigid rules. Dialogue encouraged instead of decrees. Everywhere, Sareth's indicator pulsed in subtle patterns, a living symbol of the changes unfolding. At first, some Karani were hesitant. Guards watched closely. Advisors whispered in doubt. But as days turned into weeks, remarkable results emerged. Indicators that had been dormant for generations began to react not toward humans, but toward each other. Karani, who had never trusted their peers, began to communicate openly, to share ideas, and to cooperate in ways previously impossible. The Council realized something extraordinary. Humanity's influence had not only affected Sareth, but it had awakened dormant potential across Karani society. Trust and empathy were contagious, not through coercion or orders, but through example and connection. News of this transformation reached other species in the Galactic Compact. Reports described how humans could inspire change not through weapons or authority, but through behavior and example. Some species were amazed, others were cautious, yet all began to recognize that humanity's greatest strength lay in qualities that were often overlooked: courage, empathy, and the ability to act with intention. One afternoon, Sareth requested another meeting with Elias. She approached him directly, her indicator glowing softly but steadily. For the first time, she reached out her hand, not in hesitation, not as a test, but as a gesture of trust. Elias understood immediately. He extended his hand in return, touching hers lightly. The effect was immediate. Sareth's indicator pulsed brightly, and across the observation room, others began to notice the subtle shifts in her patterns. For the first time, the Karani could witness a demonstration of voluntary trust, choice, and connection, all without fear, coercion, or expectation. Elias, Sareth said quietly, your presence here, it has changed me. Not only me, but others. I understand now that trust can be a strength, not a vulnerability. Elias smiled. It has changed you because you were willing to see it. That is what humans value most. The courage to act, to trust, and to care, even when it is risky. Over the next few days, the change spread. Other Karani began to mirror these interactions. They learned to cooperate more openly, to share ideas, to express emotions without fear of judgment. Sareth's indicator continued to shine as a living symbol of what was possible. Even the Council, once divided, began to acknowledge the benefits. The Karani had discovered a new form of strength, one rooted in empathy, choice, and understanding. Finally, a formal declaration was made. The Council announced that humans would be allowed to remain as observers, teachers, and partners. They would not impose rules or authority. Instead, they would demonstrate the human way: patience, trust, and empathy as tools for growth. Across the galaxy, the story of Elias Ward and Sareth became legendary. Humans were no longer seen only as warriors, explorers, or survivors. They were recognized as a species capable of inspiring change through the simplest acts. A gesture, a word, a choice. Sareth, standing before the Council one final time, smiled. Her indicator glowed warmly, reflecting the harmony she now felt. We have learned something profound, she said. Strength is not only in control, it is in trust, in connection, in the courage to act with empathy. Humanity has shown us this, and for that, we are stronger. Elias, watching from the observation room, understood that the mission had succeeded beyond expectation. He had not conquered, coerced, or commanded. He had simply been human. And that was enough. As the sun set over the crystalline towers of Valeth, light scattered in every color imaginable, humans and Karani stood together, observing a world transformed by a single gesture, a spark of trust, and the courage to connect. For the first time in generations, Valeth felt alive in a new way. The mate indicator, once a symbol of restriction, now pulsed with possibility. It was no longer a measure of control, but a beacon of hope, a reminder that strength comes not only from power, but from empathy, understanding, and the courage to act with care. And across the galaxy, civilizations began to take notice. Humans were not conquerors. They were catalysts. They were teachers, inspiring others not with weapons, but with their humanity. Elias Ward looked out over the city, feeling a quiet pride. One simple gesture, made without thought, had changed the course of history. It had awakened a species, transformed a society, and reminded the galaxy what it meant to connect, to trust, and to survive. The future of Valeth and perhaps the entire galaxy had shifted. And it had done so because humanity, in its simplest form, had chosen to be kind, courageous, and empathetic. For the first time, the Karani were beginning to understand a truth that humans had always known. True strength lies not in domination, but in connection. The story ends here, with a galaxy watching, learning, and inspired by humanity. A species once underestimated had proven that courage, empathy, and trust could change worlds. And in doing so, humans had become a symbol of hope for all civilizations, a reminder that even the smallest act can awaken greatness.